Picture this. You're in a meeting or a conversation with your manager or a performance review, and you have something to say, and you know what it is. You've thought about it, you believe it, and then something happens. You chicken out. You wind up saying a version of it that's smaller than what you really wanted to say, or you don't say it at all. And you tell yourself, well, I'll bring it up later. And afterward, maybe in the elevator or on the drive home, you think, I should have said more. I should have asked for that thing. I should have handled that whole conversation differently. And here's what makes it so frustrating. It's not that you didn't know what you wanted to say. You knew exactly what you wanted to say. You just didn't say it. So, we're talking about here why that happens. Because I want to be really clear about something right off the bat. This is not a confidence issue, and it's not a capability issue. It's certainly not a personality flaw. It is a pattern, a deeply learned, completely understandable pattern. And once you really understand where it comes from, then you can change it. And here's why this matters for your growth as a leader. The ability to advocate for yourself clearly and directly is not separate from leadership. That is leadership. How you represent yourself in a room is how you're going to represent your team. How you hold your ground on your own ideas is how you will hold your ground on theirs. You can't lead others more powerfully than you lead yourself. So let's get into it. Most high performing professionals operate under a belief that feels completely reasonable and costs them enormously. And that belief is if I do great work, I shouldn't have to advocate. I shouldn't have to advocate for myself. The work should speak for itself. And I absolutely understand why that belief is appealing. It feels humble. It feels professional. It feels like the kind of thing that a person with integrity does, lets the results do the talking. But there's a problem with that belief. Work doesn't speak, people interpret. Your manager interprets your work through their lens, their own priorities, their own understanding of what you're capable of. Your peers interpret your silence in meetings as absence of perspective. Leadership interprets your hesitation as uncertainty. And if you are not actively, clearly, consistently representing your value, your ideas, your needs, your perspective, someone else is filling that gap with their interpretation. And their interpretation is almost never as generous as the truth. And the research on this is very full and it's a little uncomfortable. Studies on workplace advocacy consistently show that professionals who self advocate are significantly more likely to get promoted and receive higher compensation and be considered for leadership roles. And it's not because they're more talented, it's because they're more legible to the people who are making decisions. Yet most people, of course, avoid this. And it's not because they don't know they should, but something gets in the way. And that's something, that's where I want to spend our time because it's not what most people think it is. I had a client say to me earlier in our work together that I've thought about a lot. She said, I know exactly what I should say in those moments. I just don't say it. And that sentence is so important because it tells you immediately it's not a skill gap. She doesn't need communication training. She doesn't need more confidence building exercises, which is what a lot of people would think. Something else is happening here, actually, something deeper. And that's where it gets really interesting. So here's the shift that I want to make with you from looking at the behavior to really understanding the pattern beneath it. Because the moments where you hold back, where you soften your message, or you keep quiet when you should speak up, those moments are not random. They are not weakness. They are your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, just not in service of your advancement. In the early 2000s, a neuroscientist at UCLA named Naomi Eisenberger was working on what seemed like a pretty niche research question. And the question was, does social rejection activate the same neural pathways as physical pain? And it was a really good question because it came against the prevailing assumption in psychology at that time, which was that emotional pain and physical pain were fundamentally different experiences. Emotional pain was psychological, it was social and cognitive and interpretive, whereas physical pain, everybody saw as biological. And so the idea that she was investigating, the idea that they shared the same underlying neural architecture, that was considered at best an interesting metaphor, but no more than that. She designed an experiment to test it directly, and she put participants inside an fMRI scanner, a machine that tracks brain activity in real time, and she had them play a simple computer game called Cyberball. And the game involved tossing a virtual ball with two other players. And what participants did not know was that the other players were computer controlled. And at a certain point in the game, the computer players, those two, the other two players in this game, they stopped throwing the ball to the particular participant. They just left that person out, left him out, and they kept tossing that ball back and forth between themselves. And that person wound up being ignored. It was a minor social slight. It was objectively trivial, no real stakes going on, no real relationship, and no real consequence. And yet, when Eisenberger looked at the brain scans of the participants who were excluded, the neural activity was unmistakable. The same regions of the brain that process physical pain, specifically the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, lit up during social exclusion. I mean, this was no metaphor. This was literal. The same brain machinery as physical pain lit up with emotional pain. So the brain, it turned out, does not distinguish meaningfully between being physically hurt and being socially rejected. It processes both as a threat, and it responds to both of them with the same alarm system, that the alarm system that we all have. And here's the implication for every moment where you've held back, you've softened, or you've just stayed quiet in a professional setting. When your brain anticipates that speaking up might create conflict, it might invite criticism, or it might cause someone to think less of you, it registers that possibility as a threat, not a career risk, not a social inconvenience, but a true, real, physical threat. And your nervous system jumps into action. It pulls you toward safety. It pulls you toward the option that avoids that potential pain, which is usually saying less than you mean, maybe saying nothing at all. So this is not weakness. This is biology. This is a system that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to keep you safe in a social group in this case. The problem is that the same system that kept your ancestors from being exiled from the tribe is now keeping you from asking for a promotion. So once you understand that, the patterns become completely legible. And here's what 4 different patterns look like in practice. One is softening. Instead of saying, my recommendation is X, you say, I was thinking maybe X could be worth considering. You've communicated the idea, but you wrapped it in enough cushioning that no one can push back on it too hard. Because if it's not fully yours, it can't be fully rejected. Or secondly, you're over-explaining. You don't own your position. Instead, you justify it. You give a lot of justification. You give 3 reasons before anyone has even questioned the first one. Because if you explain enough, surely they're going to agree with something, and then you won't have to hold your ground. Or third, there's delaying. You think, well, I'll bring it up at the next meeting. Well, you won't. Or if you do, the moment will have passed and, you'll soften it then too. That delay, this delaying tactic, it feels like a strategy. It's usually not. It's usually avoidance. And fourth, there's deferring, letting someone else make the call, asking what other people think before sharing what you think, framing your perspective as a question rather than a point of view. So many ways of deferring. You say things like, I don't know, what do you think? When you actually have a clear thought, you actually have a clear answer. So here's what I want you to hear about all four of these patterns. They are not personality traits. None of them are. They are learned kind of strategies, like the anti-strategies, but they're all learned. And in a lot of cases, they've worked earlier in your career in certain environments, maybe with certain managers, being agreeable, being flexible, not pushing too hard. That was the smartest read. It protected you. It kept you in good standing. The problem is that what protected you then is limiting you now because leadership, real leadership, requires a different relationship with your own voice. Here's a piece of research that reframes this whole conversation. It came out of Columbia Business School in a way that surprised even the researchers that ran it. Daniel Ames and Francis Flynn were trying to solve what they thought was a straightforward question. What's the relationship between assertiveness and leadership effectiveness? More assertive leaders, do they perform better? Seems logical. You'd expect a fairly clean line. More assertive, more effective. So they ran 3 studies. They gathered ratings from hundreds of professionals about the leaders they had worked with. Real leaders, real workplaces, real assessments. So this was all very real, and they asked people to rate their leaders on assertiveness and on effectiveness. And when the data came back, it did not give them a straight line at all. It gave them a curve, specifically an inverted U shape. Leaders with really low assertiveness, the ones who rarely pushed back, rarely stated a clear position, never really advocated for their perspective, those leaders were rated as less effective. And that part, of course, was not surprising. What was surprising was that leaders with very high assertiveness, the ones who pushed hard and dominated conversations and made their positions known often and maybe loudly, they were also rated as less effective. The leaders rated most effective sat in the middle. They were moderately assertive. They were clear and direct, but they didn't dominate. They spoke up, but they also listened. They held positions, but they didn't steamroll people. So the researchers called this the Goldilocks zone of assertiveness. Not too little, not too much, just enough to get things done without damaging the relationships that make things possible. And here's the implication that matters most for what we're talking about here. Most of the high performers I work with who struggle with self-advocacy, they're not at risk of being too assertive. They are solidly, firmly on the left side of that curve, that under-assertive end. They're being spit out, as one old proverb the researchers quoted puts it, not for being too bitter, but for being too sweet. They're so focused on being agreeable, not creating fiction, on making sure everyone is comfortable, that they've essentially removed themselves from the leadership conversation. And the move they need to make, it's not dramatic. It's not a personality transplant. It's a shift towards the middle, toward the zone where you're clear enough to be trusted and you're collaborative enough to be followed. That's not just good self-advocacy. That's what effective leadership actually looks like. Let me tell you about a client of mine, Emily. Emily was one of the sharpest people that I've worked with. Great ideas, strong instincts, deep expertise in her field. And in our one-on-one conversations, she was articulate, direct, clear. And in meetings, she disappeared. Not physically, of course, she was there, but her voice was a fraction of what I knew. She'd offer a thought, and she'd immediately qualify it. She'd start to push back, and then she'd pull back. She'd retreat. She'd be in a meeting and have an insight and not share it, but she would share it on the way out to one person in the hallway. So when we unpacked this, she said something that I think a lot of you will recognize. I don't want to sound difficult. That one belief, I don't want to sound difficult, was quietly governing everything for her. It was governing her behavior in every high stakes room that she entered. So we worked on one specific reframe. Instead of asking herself, will this sound okay? She started asking, is this true and useful? That's it. That's the whole shift. If what she was about to say was true and it was useful to the conversation, she said it, and she said it fully, without hedging, without qualifying, without some kind of escape hatch built in. And it didn't take very long, but she told me that after another meeting, a senior person pulled her aside and said, I feel like I'm hearing your thinking more clearly than I've heard in other meetings. And of course, she wasn't thinking more clearly, she was speaking more clearly. Same person, she had the same ideas, same room, but she was expressing things differently. So here's the leadership connection I want to make explicit. When she started showing up with her full voice, something else shifted too. Her team started bringing her harder problems. Leadership started including her in earlier conversations because a leader with a clear, direct voice signals that this is someone you can count on when it matters. So it wasn't a coincidence. That's what self-advocacy, when you express it well, actually communicates. So here's the reframe that changes everything, and I want you to really absorb here. Self advocacy is not about pushing, contrary to a lot of people's belief. It's not about taking up space at the expense of others. It's not the squeaky wheel. It's not the opposite of being collaborative or being a team player. Self advocacy is about representing reality clearly. When you share your perspective, you are providing information that the room doesn't have without you. When you state your needs, you're making it possible for your manager to actually support you. When you set a boundary, you are creating the conditions for sustainable, high quality contribution. And when you ask for what you want, you're treating the people around you as capable of hearing it. You're not being difficult. You're being clear. And clarity is one of the most fundamentally important leadership qualities. Leaders who can see a situation accurately and represent it directly, clearly, these are the leaders that organizations depend on, especially when the situation is uncomfortable. So every time you practice advocating for yourself clearly, you're not just advancing your career, you're practicing the skill of leadership itself. Here are a couple of reframes for the beliefs that most commonly get in the way. Instead of saying, I don't want to come across as difficult, say this to yourself: I want to be clear and useful. Those are so not the same thing. Difficult means creating friction without purpose. Clear and useful means providing the perspective the conversation needs. You can be direct without being difficult. And in fact, most effective leaders almost always are. And also, instead of saying, I don't want to push too hard, say this to yourself: I want to represent what's actually needed here. Because if you have a perspective or a need or a boundary that's genuinely true and relevant, then holding it back does not protect anyone. It just leaves the room with less information than it needed. So let's talk about three concrete shifts that you can use starting in your next conversation. The first one is replace that soft language with direct language. This one is small in size, but enormous impact. Here's what the before and after sounds like. I was thinking maybe we could consider, and you change that to, my recommendation is. Instead of saying, I don't know if this is right, but you're going to say, here's my perspective. Or would it be possible to maybe, and you're going to change that to, I'd like to. You don't have to change your tone. You don't have to get aggressive or forceful. You just remove the padding. You say the thing directly. And then, this is the most important part: stop. Don't fill the space afterwards. Don't over explain. Don't immediately qualify. Say it and let it land. And the discomfort that you're going to feel in the silence, that's your nervous system doing the thing that Naomi Eisenberger's research describes. You are sitting with the possibility of social risk. Stay with it. Nothing bad is happening. The room is just thinking. The second shift is to prepare your advocacy before you walk in. Most people think about what they might say if the moment arises. But rising leaders decide in advance what they need to say, and they make sure the moment arises. Before your next significant meeting, ask yourself one question. What do I need to say in this conversation? Not, what will I say if it comes up? What do I need to say? Write it down. One sentence, your recommendation, your ask, your perspective, your boundary, one clean sentence. And then go in knowing that that sentence is coming out of your mouth before the meeting ends. And in fact, the earlier the better. This is how leaders prepare, not hoping for the right moment, but creating it. And the third shift is to use what I call the one sentence stand. When you have something to contribute, a perspective, a pushback, a recommendation, practice saying it in one sentence, clean, direct, no preamble. Here's what I believe would work best. You could say that. You could say, my read on this is different, and here's why. Or you could say, I want to flag something we're not fully accounting for. It's just one sentence, and then stop. What this does is this removes that over-explanation pattern that buries your point. It sends a strong signal of confidence because people who are confident in their position don't need 16 sentences to make it. And it invites engagement because a clear, direct statement gives the room something to respond to. Leadership is not about talking more. It's about saying the right thing clearly at the right moment. The one sentence stand, that is a great way to practice that. I want to leave you with something that a client said that has stuck with me. She'd spent years being, by her own description, easy to work with. She was that person who was collaborative and flexible and always adjusting for others. And she, as you might imagine, was well-liked, genuinely, widely well-liked. But the advancement she was working on and working toward kept not happening. And one day she said, I thought being easy to work with would help me advance. So we talked about it. And I said, well, being easy to work with will help you be liked. And that matters. Being liked matters. But leadership requires something more than that. Leadership requires that people trust your judgment, that they believe you'll tell them the truth even when it's uncomfortable, that when you say something is right, they know that you're not saying it to be agreeable, that you're saying it because you actually believe it. And they cannot believe that about you if they've never seen you hold a position. Being easy is a feature, but it can't be the whole product. Leaders are trusted not because they make everything smooth, but because when something needs to be said, they say it. When something needs to change, they name it. When they have a perspective, they share it fully, directly, without hedging. That's not being difficult. That's being dependable. And dependable at the next level is everything. The cost of not advocating for yourself, it's not just missed opportunities, it's misrepresentation. People can't see what you don't show them. They can't trust a perspective you've never fully expressed to them. And they certainly can't promote a leader whose voice they've never fully heard. Self-advocacy, it's not a personality trait reserved for the naturally bold. It's a skill. It's a learnable, practicable skill. And every time you choose to say the full version, not the softened, hedged, partially expressed version, you're practicing the most fundamental act of leadership there is, showing people who you actually are. So here's your practice this week. One thing, very specific. In one conversation, just one, say the full version of what you're thinking. Not the softened version, not the partial version, not the version with three qualifiers and all those extra details wrapped around it so nobody can push back too hard. Say the real version. Pick the conversation in advance, know what you need to say, and then say it directly, cleanly, without the escape hatch. And notice what happens, not just in the room, but in how you feel afterward. Because there is a specific kind of clarity that comes from actually having said the thing that you meant to say, from having shown up, fully shown up, from having given the room your real perspective rather than a careful approximation of it. And that feeling, that's what leadership feels like from the inside. So go give it a go, and I'll see you next week.